I ordered this kit from Speedway, really cheap, 70 bucks. Came with these two 19-inch rods, all 4 rod ends. 2 are left-hand thread and 2 are right-hand thread. It also came with these frame brackets. And then here's the hardware for the stuff. You get the 5 fine bolts, the lock nuts, a spacer of some sort, and 2 washers. Right now you can see that I got this Watts link set up, kind of mocked up. I had to make this spacer plate and then another spacer this way, and here's my mounting tab. I made this. Originally there was this one that came with it for the centerpiece here, but I decided to make my own because I needed a long one here. Basically when you're setting all this up, you want your bottom bar to be parallel to the ground at ride height with this straight up and down. So you can see right there, I gotta shorten these bars, but that's pretty much parallel. And this is my ride height. Okay. And then the top one, it doesn't really matter where it is. Ideally, you'd want this one to be parallel as well, but this one is like that at ride height. Okay. So basically, I had to figure out how to space this up to get this centered so that I could have this bar as close to the frame as possible, but still have clearance this way when this thing comes down. It was kind of a little tricky project here. So now I got to take these tubes and shorten them. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna measure from, have this straight up and down like so, and I'll measure from the center of this hole to the center of this hole. And then I'll subtract the length of these ends from the center of here to the flange on each side, and then I'll cut my pipe to that length. And since they're left-hand threads on one side and fine right-hand on the other, I don't have a fine 1/2-inch tab. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna splice these, and then I have a 7/16 bolt that fits right in between there snugly, so I'll kind of just sleeve it. So I'll slice this, cut out the measurement that I don't need to make this the total length, right? And then I'll put this, half of this inside of it, leave an 1/8-inch gap, V-groove the edges, and then weld it, right? Using what I have to make it work, that'll be more than safe. This isn't that thick of steel in the first place anyway, so I'm not concerned about that. Do that to both sides, mount it up, make sure everything works with all my tacks. So basically I have everything tacked right now, so that way I know if something binds up, it's just gonna break these little tacks, you know? That's a good way to do it. You can also tell by listening to it and seeing kind of what's going on. And right now I just have a 1/2-inch bolt that I had sitting around. The bolt that came with the kit wasn't long enough because originally they had this piece, they had no gap between here, right? Which was stupid because then it's just gonna be metal on metal. So I have these bushings, and I put this bushing in here, and then I have a bushing right here on the outside too, in case I want to add another one of these bars to sandwich this between here. Okay, and then the only bolt that I could find that was long enough, I had to space out this way with another bushing just for now, so that it would clear this. Because when this comes down, this is pretty much right up against this mounting, or right up against this cross member here. So that's just kind of sitting in there for now. I'll get the right bolt once I know it all works and all that. Long process. I got probably about 8 hours into just thinking this up and kind of doing this light fabrication work here, but it'll be cool when it's done, so it'll be worth it. Now that I got this pipe cut to the length that I need, the other one is on the saw right now. I'm gonna take it and I'm gonna bevel these edges down about 1/8 of an inch and clean up the edge just so it's nice and clean. And I can fit the 7/16 bolt in there. That'll allow me to get penetration, and then I'll also leave an 1/8-inch gap between the pipes, but a little extra penetration and a V-groove is always a good thing. Here's a little preview of the bracket that I made for my Watts link setup. The way this kind of works, this is a square tube, and then I boxed off the ends and gave it a little triangular design kind of to match everything else. And you can see that it welds onto the axle kind of like so. And then the Watts link, I'm gonna have, I had it originally welded to the top, but I'm gonna modify it so I can get everything lower. So I'm gonna have the top Watts link bar off the bottom here, and then I'll have this Watts link bar kind of where it is. And then you just take the difference between these 2 points. So say you mount this bracket right here, okay, you measure to the floor from the center of your hole, and then you measure from the floor to the center of your hole, and you can make your center bracket based off of that. Or you can do, you can get one started, get it where you need it, mount this where it needs to be for that one to be flat, and then you can modify this, mount the height of it to fit. It's pretty easy, I guess. Just kind of work one way from the other, or one way to the other, and you got to make sure that both bars are exactly parallel with the ground. Otherwise, or at ride height. Otherwise, if you do one bar like I had earlier, one bar's up like this, top bar's down like that, then it's going to rotate, but it's going to be on a diagonal plane, I found out. So when my first setup came down, it was coming down this way, and it was ended up being a ½ inch further that way, okay, and then it'd go back up, and then it'd be a ½ inch further that way when it's up at its highest. So in the center it was centered, but it wasn't, it was working on a diagonal like this, and that's not what you want. So you want to make sure that your bars are parallel with each other and parallel with the ground. That way when it rotates, they're rotating to counteract each other, so that it's, the rotating point is right in the center instead of like this. So that's a good trick, good tip if you want your Watts link to work properly. So check this out, I'm working on this Watts link here, and I got these holes exactly where they need to be on the one plate, and in order to do the other plate, the easiest way to do it without any movement and guaranteeing these are perfect alignment is you just stack these up flat, throw a couple tacks on there, drill through with the same size drill bit right there. That'll keep the alignment perfect. And then also I need to drill a hole in the center here, so I'll just center punch it on the one and then drill all the way through both. It's a little trick. I know I usually have problems lining up stuff just from the measuring method, just because you're gonna have error each way, and sometimes they can compound on you. But that's that, good little tip. Afterwards, you just grind them off and it's good as new. So I got this Watts link all set up and it works good. So I have this longer piece here, but what I'm thinking is I want to try and get this shorter so I have more room up here for my radiator and all that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip this to the bottom side of this, extend this down, and try and make this thing shorter. It's a little bit of messing around to save probably 3 or 4 inches, but I think it'll be worth it because then I can fit an intercooler in here or whatever else I need. It won't be quite as tight on space. So now that I have this bracket drilled up, I have the ½ inch holes here for my rods, and then I have a 3/4 inch hole that I drilled in both of these for my oil light bearing. Okay? Since there's no bearing that came with this kit, I'm having to modify what I made to have this bearing in it, right? Okay, so now that I have this cut, I'm gonna test it again just to make sure it all works, and then I'll take this and I will cut these edges off and then round them over to make it look all nice. Since I'm using what I got here, I have 4 of these oil light bushings, and I'm gonna use 2 right now, and then I'll save 2 for later for when these need to be replaced. If you look close at these, I'm starting to cut them, right? I don't know if you can really tell, but there's oil that actually comes out. Okay, so when you're cutting it, oil comes out of the brass or whatever these are made out of. That's why they're called oil lights, because the oil is impregnated inside them when they're made. So that way when it scrapes or when it wears down, it gets a little oil and there's lubrication already in there. You don't need to worry about it. So right now I'm just trimming this down rough fit with a cutoff wheel, and then I'll grind it down flat to get it to fit in here and sandwich tight. Alright, so here we are a couple days later. I've been putzing on this and trying to figure out the best way to do this and save the most space while still having this higher up off the ground. And about probably 10 different attempts later, I got it set up to exactly where I want it. So basically what I did was I took a jack stand on each side and set both these the same height, and then I set this at my ride height. So I set this so my bag was about halfway inflated, and that's my ride height position, okay? That's because you want your bag at about half height and half PSI for the best ride quality, approximately, okay? So once I got it set, and I remembered that I centered this pin here onto this jack stand on each side, okay? So that's my constant ride height. That's never gonna change, okay? So then I took and I shortened these bars, okay? But I still wanted them somewhat long because the longer the arc, the better the travel is. The less radius movement you get, so the less movement you're gonna get in this, okay? And then I took this plate, I made this plate up, just a spacer just because I needed to clear all this, my bag cross member here and all that, okay? So I have that spacer there. And then I made this center section. Now, the center section at ride height, you want your bars to be parallel with the ground and parallel with each other. So what I did here is I took this center section and I measured the difference between my mounts here and my mount there, okay, from the floor, right? So say this is 10 inches and this is 15 inches from the floor. Then I'm gonna want these pieces these bolts to be 5 inches apart, and I'm gonna want this to be 12.5 inches from the ground. Long story short, basically. Because you want both of these parallel to the ground, right? So I did that, measured it, did a whole bunch of different attempts, did some different brackets. Obviously, because this is a fairly long bracket, I mean, this is probably 6 inches. I wanted this to be strong. So this is 3/8 plate, and then there's a 1/4 inch gusset in here. This is 5/16 plate because it's small. Got two 3/16 plates sandwiching in between here. And if you can see in there, I got the oil light bushings. And then I got a little set thing, I forgot what it's called, sorry. Has an Allen head on it, and you set it and it holds it there. I'm blanking on what it's called right now. Anyways, so I got these bushings in here, and it goes really nice and smooth, and it's parallel at ride height. Now, you're gonna want something connected so you can keep playing with this and messing with your airbags to see kind of how everything works. So remember, I have my axle set at 14 inches off the ground approximately, so I can fit a 28-inch tire because that's a tire I'm planning on running. So I have those on jack stands because I don't have the wheels yet, and those are also constant, just like you have wheels on it. Okay, so what I'm gonna do here, I'll just cycle it through the motion here and show you kind of how it works. Okay, so this is just a ball valve, right? Now see, as you go up, this third member, or center link, pivots, and these dual panhard bars fight each other to keep this axle centered. Now if you look here, I have this pretty close to perfect. Close enough for what I'm doing here. Okay? So that's about 13.5 inches. This side here, about 13.5 inches, maybe a 1/16 less. That's pretty damn good. Okay? So that's all the way inflated. That's probably, I'd say, 120 PSI in the bags. Maybe more, but this is the max height they get. If you add any more air to them, they just get stiffer. Okay? So now I'm gonna take this off and move these jacks, which I had to hold my ride height position constant. And then I'll just let this down. Okay, now you can see that there. The reason it was a little jerky is because my body's kind of hitting on the floor back there. Stuff back there is not set up right anyways. So now you can see that these bars are this way, and this rotated over center and then came back. It's really a cool setup. The geometry is pretty wild. It keeps everything nice and straight. Now let's check here and see where it's at here. Okay, so call that 10 3/4 to the inside lip of that plate there. Now this one here, ten 3/4. Now that took 3 days of messing around and trying to figure out all this geometry to get this to be that perfect. A couple things that I noticed was that if you have these bars set not parallel to the ground but parallel to each other, you're gonna have it move on an arc like this, right? So at the bottom it's gonna be 1/2 inch over, top it's gonna be 1/2 inch over, etc. And then another thing is I haven't noticed a difference between this plate lengths. So I've had a bunch of different lengths. I had this one, I had one that was like twice this long. I was just experimenting. The thing that I noticed that was most important was keeping these bars parallel to the ground. No matter what, keep these parallel to the ground. Don't waste your time trying to beat the system and think that if you extend this or shorten this that it's gonna make up for your boo-boos. Okay, so don't waste your time with that. Only work on getting these parallel to the ground, okay? So no matter what you gotta do, either most setups you have like a conventional setup where you don't have this much travel, you have the top or one of the links on top and one of the links on bottom. But for this extreme travel I had with this airbag setup, I had to do it a little bit differently and keep space in here, okay? Because I'm gonna have a radiator right here, and if I would have had this up on top of the frame, it would have moved the top of this up 5 inches, and it would have got into the space that I need for my radiator and stuff. So this is just a couple little experimentations and a couple little tips that I got. The stock, this came with this 1/4 inch little plate for the center link, and yeah, that just wasn't doing it for me. So I decided to sandwich this like most kits. So I think that the Speedway kit is a little lacking in this area. Instead of a 1/4 inch plate, they should send 2 3/16 plates. If they're worried about price or whatever, the 3/16 is a little bit cheaper. Even though you're running 2, it'll still make a better kit, okay? Stronger kit. Another thing here, they had a triangular mount for this back section here. For me, that didn't work. Just because most setups, you have this on top of the axle, but for me, I don't have space for that, you know? Because I had to push it out and then whatever. So that was kind of useless for me, but I think what it comes with other than that, other than this center link, is pretty good. If you're running a high horsepower car, this is just 3/4 inch tubing, so like I'd say 3/16 or 1/8 inch wall, probably 3/16. So if you're running a high horsepower car, I would not recommend this Speedway setup unless you're gonna take the Heims and switch out the pipes, but that's kind of seems ridiculous at the same time. Overall, for a $70 kit, I'm pretty happy with it. It took me a lot of modifying, but I mean, I'm not really running a stock setup, so that was kind of expected. Overall, it's a good kit. Make sure you add a bushing in there. That's something that Speedway could also add. A cheap bushing that's just, you know, like a poly bushing or something of that sort. Other than that, it turned out pretty good. I'm happy with it, and I think it's pretty cool. Thanks for watching, guys. Subscribe!
Uh-oh.